This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Katherine Shen. Everyone has a hair story to tell. That's the tagline of a new exhibit at the Wadsworth Atheneum. It's called Styling Identities, Hair's Tangled Histories, and it's on view through August 11th. Coming up, a curator joins us to discuss the politics and optics of hair. But first, the curly hair movement and market is growing. For many people, especially Black women, going natural or rocking their curls doesn't feel like it's an option. The movement is about learning to style and to celebrate their natural hair without having to conform to Eurocentric beauty standards. The retail market for natural hair care products will expand to $15 million by 2031, and that's according to a recent report from Allied Market Research. And today, we'll hear from one salon dedicated to natural curls right here in Connecticut. Joining us now is Luvena Leslie, who's the owner of the Curly Hair Salon in New Haven. Thanks for joining us, Luvena.
Thank you for having me.
And also with us is Viola Clune. She's a student at Yale University and also the editor of The New Journal, which is the magazine about Yale and New Haven. She recently wrote a piece about salons like Luvena's and the work they do to untangle hair trauma. You'll find a link to it on our website at ctpublic.org/wherewelive. Viola, thanks for joining us on Where We Live today.
Thank you for having me.
And listeners, we would love to know what's your hair story. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Viola, I want to start with you. You wrote your recent piece called Kinks in the Movement, which is a braiding together of stories of New Haven's Black hair salons with her own. And it feels a lot of journalism and prose and personal stories and essays sort of all combined into one really amazing story. Can you give us an idea of why and how you set out to write this piece, Viola?
Sure. So it was one of those things that I think was in the making for a few years. I was thinking that I wanted to write something about hair, and initially I just wanted to write something more personal. And then when I came to Yale, I got involved with the New Journal and ended up pitching this piece because I saw like a kind of a need for it, an empty space that hadn't really been written about for the New Journal specifically, and at Yale and in New Haven. And so it kind of came about naturally to interweave my own thoughts that had been formulating for a while and my own experiences with what I was seeing around me and doing the work of, journalism and talking to people and figuring out what was going on.
And is the process how you discovered the Curly Hair Salon in New Haven?
To some extent. I had a friend who was mentioned in the article a couple of times, and she had gone to the salon before. And so when I was starting to write the piece, I knew in the back of my head that that was one place in New Haven that I could definitely focus on. And I was interested in talking to Luvena and seeing what was going on there.
And Viola, I would love to ask you to read a brief excerpt from the piece. I think you have something prepared for us.
Sure. So this is from the conclusion of the piece. In the world of Black hair, it can feel impossible to extricate oneself from a painful past of denigration and dehumanization. Efforts to empower women and Black people to uphold the right to choose what to do with your hair are complicated by the implication each style carries. As Monique sits under the dryer, her curly hair cutting session almost complete, a teenage boy walks into the salon, still dressed in his school uniform. When he expresses doubt that he's in the right place, I remember what Susie said about trauma that she and other curly girls experience, and I think about the boys too, about everyone. A member of the Curly Hair Salon team assures him that he has arrived. He admits he has never had a curly cut or styling before. Soon he's grinning as the hairdresser shapes and defines his fro. The Curly Hair Salon, like those around it, exists as a contradiction, intervention, remembrance, and stagnation at once. The ever-growing salon industry in New Haven suggests that there is something complementary about these contradictions, something inherent about them to these practices. Or it suggests, as Renee said, that people will always want to get cute.
And Luvena, you've read the piece, and we just heard Viola read the conclusion of the piece brilliantly. What are your thoughts about the story, her story?
Viola, first let me tell you that your article was so wonderful. I loved reading it, not even because I was involved with it, but just because it was such an excellent piece. Kat and I were talking before this about how you're just so talented. You're such a talented writer.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. But it was really great. And she puts into words just so many feelings in that article. Feelings from her personal perspective, feelings as a customer, feelings as a friend of a customer. And like I smiled the whole time reading it. And even the end, I really did enjoy the end. I was glad that she just read that excerpt about the boy who came and he was assured he was in the right place. Because like she said, she talked to Susie, who's one of my top stylists, and there's so many people who struggle and have trauma from their childhood into even adulthood with having curly hair.
Yeah, I have to agree. Viola, I love that you chose that conclusion and agreeing with Luvena that there's something very poignant ending it that way because I think it really shows the universality of hair trauma or not knowing where to go. And Viola, I'm curious to hear, what has the response been like to your story so far? It was published in November, and I'm assuming that this is probably a story that may or may not be familiar for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think, well, just to the point about the ending, it was important for me that it wasn't just like, while women held a very important place in the story, I did want to make it more universal.
Right.
And so that goes into response too. I think from people, a lot of students at Yale, even who might have felt previously like this was a story that they knew they talked about with their friends, but seeing it published and in print in one of the big publishing journals for the school was a big deal. And then I also like heard from some people outside of New Haven and Connecticut who read it, and it gave them a lot of insight into the area and also just helped them connect personally as well. So, I mean, I think people found a lot of ways to connect, and it was just good to also see something that they had been experiencing but hadn't really been expressed, at least in this forum and space.
Right. And also in your article, you point out, throughout the many voices that you showcased, you also pointed out a lot of the cultural trends and the systemic pressures that have shaped how Black women, in particular, view and subsequently style their hair throughout your story. How would you say the current sort of cultural shift is changing? For better or otherwise? You think?
Yeah, so I think writing this article is really interesting because I had to kind of capture and put research and numbers to things that I knew inherently and saw happening around me. And so, something that I mentioned in the article, something that Susie talks about is the rise in like YouTubers, and just people on social media who kind of spearheaded the natural hair movement. And I think that generally, you know, is still moving in that direction. Natural hair is still kind of in, and being embraced more and more. But something that I'm also trying to capture with the article is that there are holdups, there are challenges, there are critiques. So something that, Lavina and I talk candidly about is there, a sort of upholding of previous Eurocentric standards, even in the midst of this positive natural hair movement? How do you combat or how do you embrace natural hair when there are the physical limitations of losing hair, or just still feeling, a lack of confidence, etc. There are certain laws in place that, you know, uh, sort of are actually prohibiting it. So I think while it's still we're moving in a positive direction, I think with anything, after some years, we're seeing how, it's not a clear journey forward.
What do you think, Luvina?
Yeah, I was going to mention what she said about the laws going in place, like with the Crown Act. And I think the I think the exposing of the fact that hair is not accepted as it is even just enough to kind of bring it into the forefront a bit more, because I think most people didn't even know that it was a problem, because majority of people don't think, like for instance yourself, like you don't think about your hair and how it'll affect your life in society or your career, anything like that.
Right.
Whereas, like she said, there are so many there there's so much to think about when wearing your natural hair, because it could be too tight, it could be too puffy, it could be too whatever too is, and still you're still not accepted, right? Like if you wear your hair curly and it's wavy, it's like it's not making that big of a deal. But then like if you wear it in a big afro, then maybe you might be causing a little bit of attention, and therefore possibly needing rights to be put into place, laws to be put in place for you to wear your hair the way that you want to wear it.
Right. And I mean, all I had to think about was, well, when I had really, really long hair down to my waist, and when I decided to chop it off, I knew it was going to be very dramatic, and I'll get a lot of very dramatic responses. But that's it. It's
Right.
really just that. It doesn't impact my life in ways that it impacts yours if you did the same, right, tomorrow. And the fact that we're having this conversation today it's really poignant, because there was a rally scheduled this weekend or last weekend with a lot of Connecticut lawmakers reacting to an incident that recently happened in Enfield, where a former ShopRite employee alleges that she was discriminated against because of her hair color. And Hearst, Connecticut reported that she said her human resources manager told her she couldn't return to work until the red color was taken out of her hair. And, have you heard about this incident? And
I have not.
And what do you think about that? And just the fact that this has happened recently and it's in the news.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't always been a hairstylist. I worked, I had a lot of jobs before I became a hairstylist. And I remember one of my last jobs at the phone company, there was a strict policy with hair, but it didn't say anything about hair textures or hair types. It was really just hair color. It had to be a natural occurring hair color. I think that as a hairstylist, I honestly think that the way somebody wears their hair or what color they make it is such a silly factor to consider when considering how well someone can do a job. Like your hair has nothing to do with the way you do your job, except add or take away confidence. And if that red hair gives you all the confidence that you need, why would you not want your employee to wear the red hair?
And you mentioned the Crown Act earlier, so I do want to dig into that a little bit and just give a little background. The legislation, which stands for Creating a Respectful and Open World for Natural Hair, has been championed by natural hair advocates who argue Black Americans have faced discrimination in the workplace and in schools because of their hair. California Governor Gavin Newsom signed a law in July 2019 that banned hair discrimination that went into effect in the next year. And CNN reported as of July 2023 that more than 20 states have enacted legislation to combat race-based discrimination against hair texture and protective hairstyles. And that's also according to the Economic Policy Institute. And here in Connecticut, there's also a very real history of hair discrimination that we just mentioned, and we also have laws that protect against what we were just talking about. And Viola, I want to bring you in real quick. Are laws like the Crown Act helping sort of chip away at this discrimination? Do you think we're moving forward?
I mean, I think, as Luvena said earlier, just to even acknowledge that there is an issue, is the first step, and the fact that legislation can be passed. It's not like with any issue, it's not going to be a final solution. And this recent incident in Connecticut is showing just that. And I just wanted to tag on to that a little too, that I think the fact that, it was about hair color and is not explicitly a racial issue is something to note. I think one, it is important to say that this is not just something that affects, it should gain support, and people should see it as not just something, restrictions that are not just being placed on people of color, but can really extend out and be societal as well. And also that there are things that are more subliminal. And I think so when legislation like the Crown Act gets passed, it's a good first step, but it's really important to make sure that there aren't these microaggressions that are still a little more subliminal and easier to hide, that are still kind of finding their way into different pockets of society.
Well, and then we'll be digging deeper into that throughout the conversation. But Viola, I before we let you go, I would love to learn more about your own hair story from writing this piece. Are there moments that jumped out to you?
Yeah, I think I when I wanted to write the article, I had a lot that I had to draw could have drawn on, and was obviously restricted to a certain amount of words and not overwhelming the story about New Haven with my own. But hair and the salon has played a very important part in my life. Obviously, there's like the most emotional impact with my mom and her hair loss experience going through chemo. But then on the flip side, like just the environment of hair salons, I tried to capture that a little bit in the article. Can be a very healing space, but also have a lot of uh, implications that might need to be unpacked. So, yeah, when I was writing, I was trying to find the experiences that spoke to a lifetime, or 21 years um, of hair being very important, and the spaces in which I got my hair done being very important to me.
And Luvena, I know we can fangirl about Viola's piece all day, but what did you take away from reading her story?
I actually really did love the part where she shared about her mom. That was like the most touching part for me, just because like all the emotion in it, you could just feel all the emotion, like seeing her mom lose her hair and being in a salon where we have people who lose their hair all the time. And coincidentally, a lot of a lot of people who don't have curly hair after chemotherapy, it's called chemo curls, they end up getting curly hair. So we get clients who come in at 40, 50, 60 years old who've never had curls. But each time it's always with a lot of emotion. It's a lot of tears. And I really appreciate you sharing that part, Viola.
Thank you, Luvena.
Well, thank you so much, Viola, for sort of bearing your soul with us and sharing your story. You've been listening to Viola Clune, who's the editor of the New Journal. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Viola.
Of course, thanks for having me.
And we'll be continuing this conversation with Luvena Leslie, who's the owner of the Curly Hair Salon, after a quick break. And for our listeners, tell us about your journey with curly hair, or if you have any questions, give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Katherine Shen. This hour, we're discussing the so-called cultural reckoning around curly hair, and later we'll preview a new community-driven exhibit dedicated to the idea that everyone has a hair story to tell. So what's yours? Call us, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So we're back with Luvena Leslie, who's the owner of the Curly Hair Salon in New Haven. And Luvena, can you take us back to the beginning? When did you open the Curly Hair Salon?
I officially opened on September 1st in 2011. Yeah, it was on Audubon Street in New Haven. Coincidentally, I meant to share this with Viola. I opened on Audubon Street, it's on Yale, pretty much like very close to Yale campus. And but I'll tell you a story later.
So that's when you opened it. And,
Yeah.
And what did you have a moment where you're like, I got to do this, or why did you decide to open the Curly Hair Salon?
Well, I always knew that I would be an entrepreneur. And, as I asked God to guide me on my journey and help me figure out like where to go, I made a plan. I made a plan probably about 3 or 4 months before I actually opened the salon. And my plan was to get a second job and take that money to open up a location because I was working for a salon at the time. And the story is so long and wonderful to tell, but within a few months, I had a salon that I didn't have to build. It was there. It was fully furnished. It was beautiful. And yeah, so I was able to open it, but I knew I wanted to do curly hair. I was a little nervous about only doing curly hair because I was going out on my own and I wasn't sure how much clientele I would have to just strictly do curly hair. So I started out doing curly hair and straight hair and then phased out the straight hair clients as I could afford to.
So it sounds like we got a Sparks Notes version of your long story.
Yes.
So did things go to plan, or sounds like your initial plan didn't pan out specifically, but it still ended up where you want to be?
Right. It was a better plan. Like how it ended up was even better because my plan was to wait for a year or two to open, and I put it on paper, and I think once I put it on paper, it just kind of like grew legs and ran. Right. And then I was able to, like I said, open the salon within a few short months.
Right.
That wasn't the plan. It was a great thing that happened, better than I could have imagined.
I mean, life tends to do that to you.
For sure.
Right. You're like, I'm going to jog, but then you're sprinting all of a sudden. And because you mentioned you weren't sure if you want to just focus on curly hair. So has your client base help you sort of decide that? How has that been like over the years?
So I knew that I wanted to do only curly hair. I just wasn't sure if I could afford to do only curly hair because I had a big rent payment. Starting out this business because of its location, the square footage. And I knew I wanted to do only curly hair. Again, I just wasn't sure that I could afford to do it. But take you years forward, I was on Audubon Street for 2.5 years. I had a daughter with Down syndrome, and then she had a lot of health issues. So I moved to a sweet space in North Haven and dealt with her health issues. And after, I said, once she turned 3 years old and started school full time, I would go back storefront. And before I went back storefront, I was trying to decide what I was going to do, whether I was going to stay with just curly hair or if I was going to do curly hair and straight hair, because I was going to be storefront. And my locations before, my first location was storefront, but the second one wasn't. So you'd only know if I was there if you had an appointment. And I said, people are going to walk in, we're on a main street, and am I going to turn down all these straight hair people? So that day I asked a few clients, hey, what do you think? Do you think we should do, because it was just me at the time, but I knew that once I moved, I'd have employees. So I said, do you think we should do straight hair too? And they were like, no. I was like, no. They were like, no, just like, you should have a place just for us. And I asked maybe 3 or 4 clients that day, and everybody said no.
Well, that's 100%.
That's 100%. And I didn't expect that. But I went with it, and I stayed curly hair only.
Right. And how would you say the pandemic has changed things? Because I think that was definitely a time where I think a lot of us have various reckonings with our hair.
Yeah. As much as I dislike what the pandemic did to the world,
right,
it helped the salon significantly. We started out, at the time I think I had... At the time, I had 3 full-time stylists, and we were pretty busy, but we had times when we could go out and have lunch or like get our nails done, and we were closed for those 3 months, and I canceled every appointment that we had. And when we opened after 3 months, I could not believe how busy we were. And we were so busy, I think, for a number of reasons. One, because people just didn't like to not be able to get their hair done. But 2, people weren't getting their hair done, so they saw the way that their natural hair was growing in. And some people wanted to explore that, whether it was their curls or whether it was their color, because I've had a few clients where we've cut off all their color out of their hair and they've embraced their gray curls. And then we've had people who just embraced their curls overall because maybe they thought their curls were too difficult to deal with because they never really saw them. As soon as they came in, they would straighten them or put a wig on or relax it. And now they were like, wow, I think I might be able to work with this.
Well, that's amazing. And I do want to play a quick clip from Mecca Davis Provide, who's a small business owner in Connecticut, who we had on the show last year, who's a proponent of natural products. So let's take a quick lesson from Mecca.
I've seen an increase in natural hair, the transitioning from relaxed hair to natural hair care within the past 6 to 8 years, it's been a huge increase, which obviously made the market increase for products to be available. I don't necessarily know what everyone's personal reason is for that particular increase in change, but I do have a feeling that it has to do with kind of getting to, the self-care thing and loving who you are as a person and, just understanding that there are harmful ingredients that we no longer have to deal with now. There's options, whereas 10, 15 years ago, we didn't have as many options. So I think there are a plethora of reasons as to why people are transitioning, but for the most part, primarily it's health and primarily it's just being comfortable in your own skin.
What's your response to that, Shemeka? Because I think Viola also touched on those points as well.
For sure. And I actually know Shemeka. And yeah, that's exactly right. Like she said, you never know why people are transitioning into that. But I'd say her last statement was people being comfortable in their skin. That is the biggest one. And I think with her business and my business, because we're teaching people, those people are becoming examples of wearing your hair and being comfortable with what your hair looks like. And, if you do it, then I might get the boldness to do it also.
Right. And we talked a little bit about this earlier and touching on the historical facts that we know Black people, especially Black women, have historically had to deal with hair trauma and racism. And I think more and more conversations are happening about that. But also this idea is universal as well, which Viola also touched on earlier. That this is more than just a community. This is a broader sort of impact on people.
For sure. Like I was going to tell you the story earlier. When I had my salon on Audubon Street, I'd get a lot of grad students and I'd get a lot of of girls who were going to become lawyers. And they would come to me and they would come for usually interestingly enough, like a deep conditioning treatment. And I would ask like, oh, do you want to get a haircut today? And they say, no, I'm interviewing for my summer study, their summer internship. And they said, once I get the job, after I straighten my hair, I'll come back for you to cut it. And I don't think it's as much anymore. People are now being able to wear their curls in an interview and get a job.
Well, and that, I mean, that's a big change, right? Compared to say a couple of years ago. And I think you just told our producer prior to the show that there's less of a will to contend with your hair in order to tame it and to fight what it is. Can you explain that?
Oh, yeah. Because it really is. The thing is like Shemeka said in the with the chemicals, right? So that's one thing. There are repercussions to the relaxing, the chemical treatments, but also like as far as fighting it, when you have curly hair and you live in New England, granted, we only have a good 6 months of humidity in summer, but when you work so hard to straighten it and then you go outside and all of your hard work and your sweat, your literal sweat, right, is undone in 5 minutes, it just seems so defeating. And the other thing, which I don't know if I told your producer earlier or if I told her in our previous conversation, curly hair makes people look younger. I don't really care what anybody says. It's a fact. It is a fact. And so why not look younger if you can while embracing your curls, as opposed to the straighter, like you and I were talking earlier, short versus long, but also it's the curly versus straight, where the curlier definitely tends to give you some years off, take some years off.
Well, you heard the facts here, folks. So her Luvena is just spilling some facts with us today. And like we talked about it a little bit earlier too, with these conversations happening, I think sort of word of mouth or going through your salon, people are more familiar with this, or they see, like you mentioned, if I'm talking about it, then maybe you can do it, I can do it, they can do it. What makes you the proudest of the work that you do? Is it seeing clients that are comfortable with who they are, with their hair, or, is there a moment that you will never forget?
Actually, the reason I opened my salon, the moment I will never forget is when I did work for another hair salon and I would cut curly hair. The clients, when I was done with their hair, let me backtrack a little bit. I think that curly hair people are used to having really bad haircuts. So when they come to me, whether it's now or what back then, and especially back then, the expectation was so low that they would leave their hair with something that they liked. So when I was finished with their hair, they would be the surprise on their face would be, they couldn't believe that they looked like that. And most importantly, they would ask to hug me. And that's how I knew that I was making a real difference in these people's lives. That's when I knew that I had to do curly hair only, because they wanted to hug me. Like, to want to hug a stranger after an hour just because they did your hair is like such a big deal. And now still people still do want to hug me after I've done their hair and made a big change. But that was when I knew that this is what I'm supposed to do, because it was making a real change. And there were so very few options 12 years ago when I opened the salon,
right,
that it was the place. It was like one of the only very, very, very few places they could go, even in the tri-state area. That's the reason I had to do it, because I knew that I could positively impact these people's lives to the point where they want to hug me.
Well, I was going to say, I can't imagine what it feels like to inspire that kind of confidence, because it's tangible and it's intangible. I mean, it's tangible for you because you're literally touching what is either giving them confidence
For sure.
or not. And so does that get old?
No. And as a matter of fact, I think because I'm a biracial woman, like I grew up with a white mom and a black dad, and I did not like my hair growing up at all. And my mother really didn't try, because and I don't blame her for it, because she didn't even try to do her own wavy hair. So it wasn't personal. It's just who she was. So it never gets old, and it especially never gets old for like the little girl that's me in the chair, the little girl who like doesn't feel confident, but she walks into the salon, or a little boy, but they walk into the salon and they see people that look like them, like myself or my other stylists or other people, because everyone who comes in the salon has curly hair. Anyone who's getting their hair done, we all have curls. That is also really one of my proudest moments, is when I know that I'm changing, like by having the salon, I'm changing somebody's beginning, the way they see their hair from the age of 5, 6, 7, preteen. That is probably what makes me the proudest.
Well, I mean, I feel that to the extent of, I am not a person who knows how to do hair. I've tried YouTube videos, and it's just not my thing, which is why I ended up just chopping it off and freaking everyone out. But that's a story for another day. And we've heard this phrase earlier. We've talked about it. Everyone has a hair story to tell, which is the tagline of the exhibit that's happening at the Wadsworth Atheneum. What comes to mind when you hear that? Everyone has a hair story to tell.
Right. Everybody does have like you said, even your straight hair, you got a story. Everyone really does have a hair story to tell, because hair is so, it adds, like you said just a second ago, it adds or takes away confidence, because it's right there. It's on our face. It's like right above our face, and everybody sees it, and what it looks like impacts how we feel. So yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say everyone in the world has a hair story to tell. I mean,
Sure.
But I'd say most women have a hair story, and I would dare say that most women with curls for sure have a hair story to tell. Well,
and as we will hear more stories from other people, how has opening your salon deepened your own personal hair story?
Well, I haven't straightened my hair since I opened my salon, except for this recently, just to put some braids in my hair, but I haven't straightened my hair at all. And it sounds so corny and cliche, but like it really is my crown. And it's often associated with who I am. If somebody says, "Oh, do you know Luvena?" It could be Luvena with the curly hair, right? Like that's like part of my identity. And sometimes I'll put it back because I don't want to be Luvena with the curly hair today. I just want to be Luvena today. But my hair is definitely a big part of who I am and my brand, because, I have to represent what I'm selling.
I love that too, because most people know Catherine with short hair now. Nobody really knows Catherine with long hair.
Wow.
That's a past story. That was. And then just a quick reminder for our listeners that we would love to hear your hair story. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. I do want to share a quick comment from Kevin, who wrote a comment in from Hartford and said, "I think this is really interesting because the Hartford Courant is reporting that the state of Connecticut, that all barber hair schools teach cutting textured hair. It feels like the state is trying to teach everyone to cut everyone's hair. What do you think about that, Luvena?
I think that we are making, Kevin, we are making strides in the right direction. I think people often have unrealistic expectations when it comes to hairstylists. I'll just say this in the defense of hairstylists, because not everybody knows how to do any one thing really well anyway. It's only 1,500 hours. I think what the state and what other states are going to do is expose people more to different textures and offer them some help, not just braiding. And but I think it is great to teach them that it is different, because when I was in hair school, I would get curly hair people, but I only know how to cut it like a straight haired person. So hopefully I can get involved with that a little bit and help the state to see that you can't just accept it. You've got to really treat it different.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin, for taking the time and writing that comment in. We're listening to Luvena Leslie, who's the owner of Curly Hair Salon in New Haven, and she'll be staying with us. Coming up, we preview a new exhibit called Styling Identities, Hair's Tangled History at the Wadsworth Atheneum. Curators say everyone has a hair story to tell. What's yours? Let us know. 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Catherine Shen. Everyone has a hair story to tell. That's the tagline of a new exhibit called Styling Identities, Hair's Tangled Histories at the Wadsworth Atheneum. And joining us now to discuss is Jama Holchin, who's a curator for the Wadsworth Atheneum. Thank you so much, Jama, for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled to be on.
Well, we're thrilled that you're here with us as well. And still with us is Luvena Leslie, who's the owner of the Curly Hair Salon in New Haven. So, Jama, can you give us an idea of what this exhibit is about?
Of course. So, the idea started a couple of years ago at the Wadsworth, that we really wanted to have a show about hair, but more than just hair, also have it about the community. And think about what hair means to us as a museum, as a staff, and as a community. And so we have a broad group of curators that have been working on this show, but we've also tried to bring in community voices as much as we can. We've worked with 14 people from the community with an advisory board that helped guide all of our decision making on the exhibition. And we've brought in more voices into the exhibition as well, through some great video projects, through our exhibition zine, and through some reflection labels. And we really think that we love this idea that everyone has a hair story to tell. And by harnessing all of the wonderful, great experiences of our community and aligning it with all of the incredible art, I feel like we've made something really special. And I think that synergy between our community voices and the art that we have on view, and to me, it's pretty magic. I'm excited about it.
I mean, we found the zine very magical. We have a really fun time flipping through it. And for our listeners, it is linked on our website, so you can check out the amazing photos of some of the pieces. And I do want to play a clip from Chloe Collins. So we will be hearing from one of the curators. Chloe is one of the curators of this exhibit and also an assistant librarian and archivist at the Atheneum who worked on that zine. And she also touched on the importance of some of those community contributions.
The whole emphasis is really just on community involvement and trying to bring in people who are not usually involved or reflected, or who don't usually necessarily come to our museum, and making it a place that feels inviting and where they feel that their experiences are reflected. Just seeing how many members of the community have really shown up and given us great feedback and expressed their enthusiasm for the way that this exhibition came together, for their involvement in the exhibition and really feeling that this is their exhibition as well, which it is because we've had so much community input, our advisory board, but also we were visiting salons and barbershops. And so I think that one thing that's really interesting about this exhibition is the fact that we have community loans in the exhibition, and the fact that members of the community felt comfortable loaning their personal items. We have turban from the Sikh community, we have a hijab, we have a wig, we have, just kind of the sense that people really wanted to be a part of this exhibition and were willing to share their cultures with us in order for that to happen.
And Chloe mentioned the importance of both community and vulnerability, and people really sort of bearing their souls with some of these submissions. What would you add, Jama, to this?
Yeah. When you ask somebody to share their hair story with you, it's never just about their hair. Hair is one of the most visible ways that we express our identity, but it's also deeply personal. And it requires a lot of vulnerability and trust to be able to authentically share a hair story with someone. And I just feel so privileged that so many people in our community trusted us with their hair stories, and that we're able to intertwine all of those strands together to tell an even bigger story. I've had feedback with some people. I've had conversations with people in the galleries, and they've said, I enjoyed hearing about experiences that were so very different from my own, and also feeling connected to them in ways that they didn't expect. And so it's really exciting that we're showing the wide variety of hair experiences, but also tapping into that, what is really human about them and what is relatable across all different types of people.
Well, and then some of the other strands that you're intertwining here is, and something that we've talked about too, is about the politics and the optics of hair, but it's also about the very, very private and personal relationships that we all have with our hair. Can you talk about that kind of script flip, Jama?
Yeah, so there's none of us can, or not many of us can totally escape that, the optics and the politics of hair. Not all of, certainly, some people are more influenced by them, with the Crown Act specifically projecting race-based discrimination. But even the societal expectation of how much time we spend grooming our hair, I think it's really impossible to get outside of those social expectations with how we choose to style our hair and how we choose to present it to someone. But at the same time, all of those moments where you're standing in front of the mirror and you're getting ready for the day, those are really personal. Or perhaps when you have a stylist like Luvena touching your hair and letting them shape how you do it, all of these it's really hair being so closely tied to our heads, to our bodies. It really requires vulnerability and trust. And that is a really personal relationship, both with yourself and the people that you trust enough to get close enough to touch your hair.
Well, and then we always appreciate our listeners sharing your stories with us. Let us know if you have a hair story. Call us 888-720-9677 or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. We're going to take a quick call from Marie, who is on line 1. Marie, you're on the air.
A wonderful show, and is very personal for me. I grew up in the New Haven area, and my mother struggled with my hair when I was young and tried to keep it short. When I became a teenager, I had very long, frizzy hair that just stood out everywhere, and that was part of my identity. That was part of being different. When I was a young adult, I discovered a hairstylist in New Haven who I still remember very fondly. His name was Maurice Maurice Fleischman. He had a shop in his house on the first floor on Chapel Street near the Y. And he did what was called hair shaping. And he was the first person who cut my hair dry, who looked at the curls and figured out what would work for my head. And I was a different person after him. And I was a loyal customer. In fact, when he moved to the Towers, I had him come to my house and do my hair until he could no longer do it. And then from there, I discovered Joe Bruno, who Luvena worked with and still has a salon. And it's the same thing. My hair is cut dry. But I do have a question for Luvena.
Go for it, real quick.
Now I'm in my 60s, and I'm going gray, and the patches of gray are not curly. They're wavy, and it seems like I have two different kinds of hair in my head, and I wondered if she had any comments about that or what I can do. Because I'm losing my curls, and I'm upset about it.
Yeah, Marie, the thing is like not just with the gray hair, but then with the hormones and menopause, those will really do you in. My question to you is your gray hair less coarse or more coarse than your regular hair?
It's less coarse. It's wavy, not as tightly curled.
Not as tightly. That's so interesting. It's typically the other way around. The only thing I can recommend doing is just doing more scrunching when you're putting your gel in your hair to try to like really activate those waves into curls. It just really depends on how the waves are dispersed throughout your hair. But if you can, like, try to just take those sections out, maybe even do like a finger coil on those just to make them curl a little bit more.
Well, thank you so much, Marie, for calling us and for getting a question. And we really appreciate your time. And speaking of time, unfortunately, because we're having such a fun time, we're almost out of the time. Luvena, we'll love some final thoughts from you from this conversation.
So thank you for having me again. And, there are so many resources now for people to wear their naturally curly hair. Mine is just one of those great resources. If you're looking to embrace your curls, embrace your color, find a professional to help you through it. YouTube is great, but there are just too many options. It's best if you find a professional who can literally tailor something for your hair needs so that you don't have to go to Target and pick out random products, because that can also really be discouraging on this journey.
Yeah, I've picked out a lot of random products, and I'm still not quite sure exactly what's working, but you know what? I'm just gonna roll with it. So, you've been listening to Luvena Leslie, who's the owner of the Curly Hair Salon in New Haven. Thank you so much, Luvena, for being with us today.
Thank you for having me again.
And you were also listening to Jama Holchin, who's the curator for the Wadsworth Atheneum. Thank you so much, Jama, for being with us today as well.
Thank you.
And to play us out here is a soundscape put together by Pedro Bermudez and Revisionist Films for one immersive installation at the Wadsworth Atheneum. You're listening to the sounds of Hartford salons and barbershops. I'm Catherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.
Joe? Yeah. Because if it's a hotter, more humid day one day, so you might have more of an afro this week than you did last because it wasn't as humid. So I lean on the side of caution with it and just always throw. Oh God, yeah. I would say it's bad, but it's not. Because it's the kids benefit from it. How bad they are, or how spoiled they are. But
I was just talking to my mom about this. It's like a lot of stuff, like preparing for back to school. I felt like a couple of years I used like the same book bag. And she's like, no, I know I bought you a new book bag. I said, I'm pretty sure. She's like, you're memory bad. I'm like, no, it's not. No, I believe you're correct. Because when I checked before I left, I thought it was going to rain, so I wasn't sure what shoes to wear. Then it said, I think it said 83 degrees. So I was just like, oh.
So yeah, when I look at the weather, which I try to do like every couple days, especially the days I'm here in the salon.